Welcome back to a complete history of Manchester United. I'm your host, Wayne Barton, author and producer of several Manchester United books and films, joined as always on this journey by the legendary football writer Paddy Barclay, and is, if I may say so, in my humble opinion, the greatest football writer of our country's history. And I thought I'd drop that in just before you could disagree to take you on this journey through Old Trafford history. If you are watching this video, please give it a like and subscribe and join in the conversation in the comment section. You can do that if you're watching it live or on replay. If you're listening to the audio podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a review on the platform you are listening on. Paddy, Manchester United continued the rebuild into the 60-61 season now. The rebuild, obviously, is referencing to the post-Munich progression that United are in at the moment. As because they went on the long post-season tour last time, there was no pre-season this time round, and you wonder if that maybe this played into United's disastrous start to the season, because they only win two wins in the first 10 games. They lose 7 times. Yes, there's the post-Munich transition, and that's going to play a big part in that. But maybe because of the fact that United have started their own trend, I know that pre-seasons were coming in around football, but perhaps this was an indication that, it might be a good idea to get some players warmed up before the season begins.
Yeah, definitely an example of that. It was a flat-footed start that eventually saw, I can't remember the exact time, but it sort of early autumn, they were third from the bottom, and Matt Busby was feeling a bit of pressure. The crowds were dropping off a bit, and there was a sort of an atmosphere of depression, relative depression about the place. Some players, Charlton, Fulks, and Violet, were suffering the psychological after effects of Munich. I know we're talking 2 years on, but 2 years is a very short time, or can be in terms of the trauma of disaster, the sense of loss and grief. Yes, it was very, very difficult, but Busby, who himself was still suffering the physical after effects and mental of Munich, was under pressure, and this was shown. David Meek, the great Manchester Evening News long-serving United correspondent, told me that at one stage, with Busby under pressure, he thought, I'll do a story. I'll go to Harold Hardman, the chairman, and see what he says, and because knowing that he would back Matt, which he duly did. David wrote, Hardman says, the chairman says Matt's position is utterly safe. He's done so much for the club, and the future couldn't be in safer hands, blah, blah, blah. And Busby was furious, and not because he felt that, he accused David of trying to cause trouble and all that, and going behind his back. And that was an indication that Matt felt under a lot of pressure, and United were in notional relegation trouble. But results did improve, and in some cases quite spectacularly.
Yeah, it's incredible to think that at this point Busby's been in charge for 15 years. Yes, there's been the crash, but he's been a long time in charge, so you can quite understand where his frustration comes from, basically, because Busby at this moment in time, iron fist is probably too strong a term to put it, but he's got complete control of Old Trafford, as was given to him. So he doesn't see. There would never be an indication to him that there's any kind of positional threat. So while Meek's intentions were great, you can understand why Busby was affronted that he didn't approach him first and foremost, because as far as Busby would have been concerned, he would have been the figurehead. You don't need to talk to the chairman. Everything's under Busby's control. The idea of
that's true. I think that was how he felt, and you could imagine Alex Ferguson, in many ways a different sort of character to Matt. reacting in exactly the same way, but perhaps more predictably.
Yeah, and so you mentioned that the position was poor in the table, so poor in fact that Busby early on in the season started ringing the changes a little bit. We talked about some players coming into the team post Munich. Obviously, those ones who came in the Sheffield Wednesday game and the forthcoming games in the FA Cup run have gone down in history, and we've already talked about them on this podcast. Now, moving forward already 2 years, there's a new group of young players who have come into the side. Again, perhaps not benefiting from the long-term education of the youth team, the reserves, the A team. They're still skipping a generation, and I think you can say that for all of these players, really. Johnny Giles, Jimmy Nicholson, Ian Meyer, and on the 1st of October, a young lad called Nobby Styles makes his debut to basically he's coming in to play in his hero Eddie Coleman's number 4 shirt. So already there's a turnover of 2 lots of players in the post-Munich years, which is really, when you think about it, remarkable, isn't it, Paddy? I mean, that kind of considering Busby had got such a good groove in longevity and consistency with the team post pre-Munich. Now this massive turnover of obviously including the likes of Crowther and McGuinness, who have already left for different reasons. It's mind-boggling how many players.
It is. But I mean, the players that you've already mentioned, that in a way they make the point of how wide the net is now spread. Ian MOIR, the winger, was from I think Aberdeen, but certainly Scotland. Jimmy Nicholson was from Northern Ireland. By the way, United scout Bob Bishop is already busy on another talent up there, a 14-year-old kid called George Pesby. He's very small, so might not make it. But, you know, to the south, Billy Behan, great United scout in the Republic of Ireland, has already sent over. United had to pay for Tony Dunne, even though he was a teenager, had to pay 5,000 to Shelbourne for such a talent. So they're coming from all over the United Kingdom, the farthest flung parts. And yet, maybe the one who made the biggest, well, definitely the one who made the biggest impression was right on the United's doorstep in Collyhurst, and that was Nobby Styles. But there's an interesting story, if I may, Wayne, about Nobby. As you rightly say, he makes his debut in the autumn of the season 60-61 that we're talking about. But Nobby might not have had such a distinguished career but for Harry Gregg. What happened was that United played a friendly at Hibs. And as you know, the United's habit was to take kids on these trips, and Nobby didn't play in the game against Hibs. I think it was a testimonial up there in Edinburgh, but he was brought along just to get a smell of the first team action and frankly to help lug the kit around. So he was at the back of the bus and he was playing cards with a few of the other young players. And Harry Gregg noticed that he was holding the cards right up to his face. And anyway, he had a word with Nobby, or young Nobby, Harry did, about this. And Nobby Styles, Harry noticed that one of the players actually was calling him Blind Pew. And he said, "Have you got a problem with your eyesight, son?" And he tried to deny it, but then it came out. He told Harry that, yeah, when he was at school, you know, the kids used to, he wore these glasses and the kids used to call him Specky and all that kind of stuff. And he'd tease him. So he decided to sort of cover it up. And if he was playing cards or reading, he would hold things straight up. Anyway, Harry was in training, in getting treatment actually from Ted Dalton one day, and Matt came in. And Harry says, "Did you know that the boy Styles has he's got an eyesight problem. Anyway, Ted's sort of thinking, well, you really have to tell Matt that. And Matt said, really? He said, yeah. So Matt calls for Styles, and eventually Styles admits he has. So he's got a problem with his eyes. So Matt said, right, Ted, make sure the boy Styles goes to an optician and quickly. And that was why Styles started wearing contact lenses, only during matches. But it was while wearing contact lenses and with his better eyesight that he was to win the game's greatest prizes with Manchester United and England. So well done, Harry Gregg, for seeing the elephant in the room and getting Nobby sorted out with the eyesight problem. And it was presumably with the contact lenses in that he scored quite early on in his career, didn't he? He was playing midfield.
Yeah, he scored a goal against Newcastle, which he described as being in the vein of Eddie Coleman, his hero. And
well, Eddie Coleman was deadly from 2 yards. That was what Donny Davis, the late Donny Davis of the Manchester Guardian, he kept little private notes on the players, and with Eddie, he said deadly from 2 yards. In fact, Eddie only scored about 2 or 3 goals for United all of the time. So I think Nobby still had stars in his contact lensed eyes about Eddie Coleman, because he was from the Manchester area like Nobby and was, as you say, his hero.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Styles comes into the team and not an ever-present straight away, but certainly gets a fair number of games this season. Busby's making a lot of changes. Obviously, he's introduced those young players, but he's also looking elsewhere outside the club. There's a couple of friendlies that are played in October and November. Real Madrid visit Old Trafford. They win 3-2. Then they play a friendly against Bayern Munich, where United win 3-1, and Alex Dawson scores an hat-trick. And the day before the game, there's a couple of transfers that are made. First of all, Noel Cantwell comes in. He's signed for £20,000, and we'll talk about him a little bit further down the line. But perhaps the most eyebrow-raising transfer of the day was Albert Scanlon. He'd agreed to move to Charlie Mitten's Newcastle. He still played in the game against Bayern Munich, the friendly game, but he'd already agreed to move. And this was an interesting one because Newcastle making waves, spending some money, but a lot of going-ons at Newcastle that were going to affect the wider game.
Yes, indeed. I mean, the manager of Newcastle is Charlie Mitten, great Manchester United outside left of the Busby era, but sold against his will to Fulham because he'd gone to Colombia and defied Busby, and Busby felt he had to make a point. We've dealt with that in previous episodes, but the bridges are all mended between them now, and Mitten now in management with Newcastle and initially doing very, very well. However, at the beginning of this 1960-61 season, his star player, George Eastham, virtually goes on strike. This is at the time where there's tremendous tension between the players and the club ownerships over the maximum wage. It's now gone up to £20, but it's nowhere near the value of the players. And in fact, already the chairman of Fulham, Tommy Trinder, has said that his star player, Johnny Haynes, is worth £100 a week, 5 times the most he can be legally paid. So Eastham, catching the mood of this, and with the support of the Players' Union under the leadership of Jimmy Hill, the militant, rightly militant leadership of Jimmy Hill, it's almost like a test case. Eastham goes on strike, and eventually it's a headache for Mitten. Once the rebel, the poacher inadvertently turned gamekeeper, he's now having to deal with this situation. Newcastle decide to sell for £47,500 to Arsenal. And with this money, Mitten, desperate with the team, short of confidence, rocked by the trauma of the Eastham episode, going in a very downward trajectory. Remember, in the previous episode, we mentioned that they'd handsomely beaten Man United, Mitten putting one over Busby, but now, of course, they were going in a very poor direction. And they desperately tried to spend some of the Eastham money, and Albert Scanlon goes to join Mitten at Newcastle. It was, however, to be an ill-fated move, because at the end of the season, despite trying to reinvest some of the Eastham money, Newcastle were to be relegated. Manchester United, yes, early season they were looking as if they were taking the plunge, but as we mentioned, results did improve under a new captain, Wayne. We mentioned, I think, in the last episode, or maybe the last one before, the promotion of Dennis Violet, Munich survivor, magnificent player, to the captaincy. But really, he was a goal scorer and needed to concentrate on making and taking goals. He broke his collarbone in, was it November? And the natural choice as the captain was Maurice Setters, who'd been a very, very good signing from West Bromwich, and had come in and had helped to make United harder to play against. And in this season, he was to tame such great players as great threats to United as Jimmy Greaves when United played the great Tottenham, and a man called Dennis Law, who'd been signed by Manchester City. I mean, already Matt Busby had tried to sign Dennis Law twice. But City had brought it, when he'd come to Manchester, he'd gone to City. But Setters got the better of him in 2 derbies. So, the season did get a lot better than the early indications had suggested.
Yeah, not before the embarrassment in 2 cup competitions. Now, say 2 cup competitions, people might say, well, there's only the FA Cup. United aren't in Europe. No, they're in the League Cup, which was Alan Hardaker's his solution to the European Cup, which seems laughable now considering the reputation of the League Cup. But it was introduced as another incentive, another competition for another knockout competition to rival the FA Cup. Well, they didn't get the excitement of the Old Trafford faithful, to be honest. They played in against Exeter in the first round. They came through a crowd of just over 15,000 at Old Trafford. Then they play at Bradford in the second round, and they're eliminated in front of 4,670 people. So not a lot of interest there.
There wasn't the League Cup. The League Cup was actually to be fair, I think if we sort of look at it from today's perspective, it has proved itself. Not everybody can play in Europe, and I think quite a few teams have, including big clubs. I remember George Graham's Arsenal. It was winning a League Cup that really made them believe that they could kick on, and they went on in the sort of early Ferguson era at United. Arsenal went on to be really the club to beat, and won 2 titles in 3 years. And so the League Cup, yes, was to become significant. But you're quite right. At first, it was. I can actually remember it was to be very, very low down the list of most clubs' priorities. I mean, even at a time of falling gates, 15,000 at Old Trafford was, but told its own story, didn't it?
Yeah, they did get 62,000 through the gate to welcome Sheffield Wednesday to Old Trafford early February.
Well, that was the FA Cup, still the biggest show, even in Manchester, where Europe had become such a glamour activity. The FA Cup still pulled the crowds in. 63,500 against Sheffield Wednesday. They must have hated it.
Their day.
Most of them. What was it at Hillsborough? Or I thought it was at Old Trafford.
No, it was Old Trafford. Yeah. No, they certainly did not.
And what was the score, Wayne? What was the score? I'm a neutral. I need to be reminded of it. What was it?
Yeah. Well, there were a few goals. It was a 9-goal thriller.
The 9-goal thriller. Yeah. That was what the Man Evening News would have called it. Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately for Manchester United, they came out on the wrong side of that 9-goal thriller by a measure of 7-2. Sheffield Wednesday, of all teams, scoring 7 goals. So this is the third visit to Old Trafford in 4 years in the FA Cup, and obviously the first time that emotional occasion just after Munich. This time, well, the last 2 times they've tasted victory, and very, very handsomely so on this occasion, in front of, you're quite right, 65,000 were there to see that. That came against the backdrop. Yes, there was this cup elimination, but United were looking better in the league by the end of the calendar year. They had consecutive hat-tricks again from Alex Dawson, who was just like a goal machine. He scores against Chelsea on Boxing Day, he scores 3, and then 3 against Manchester City on New Year's Eve. United looking to turn the corner, looking a lot better. What would you attribute that to, Paddy? Just a case of the new lads settling in, or Busby?
Yes, I think I think the setter's effect helped. Particularly his, targeting of the opposition's star man, his ability to sniff out trouble. I think that did help. Not always. There's still some batterings we're going to have to address. Also, the signing of a little bit of a settling of the back three stroke 4. You mentioned the signing of Noel Cantwell from West Ham. It was actually they had to pay nearly 30,000 for him, nearly 28. But Busby knew he needed leadership, and Cantwell was very much that man. He came from the sort of Oxbridge of football intellectualism at West Ham United, where they thought a lot about the game, and they were forceful characters, all of the lads that came out of there. Cantwell was very much an example of that. Could play centre half, but Matt wanted him to play for Manchester United at left back, sort of to provide the leadership, a little bit of the leadership that had been epitomised by Roger Byrne pre-Munich, and that did prove very, very successful, or was to prove very, very successful. So that was a good signing, and the power of setters, the experience of Cantwell, those had been definite positive factors in steering United away from trouble, and once again looking up the league rather than down.
Yeah, a couple of other changes as well. We mentioned the young lad Styles coming in, doing really well. MOIR, looking quite good actually in his early games. They had United played a March friendly down at Chester, who were now managed by Stan Pearson. United won 6-0 on the day, and one of the directors said, "Will you just take the gate money and leave us young lads?" Referring to Styles and MOIR. Obviously, they were needed for United. Another fairly big change throughout the second half of the season. You mentioned the defensive reshuffling. It was now clear that Folks was in the number 5 shirt for good. We'll get on to the players who were going to be testing that earlier in the season, but Folks had now emerged as a centre half rather than a right back. He had a little spell a year or so ago in the reserve team, so he was really flourishing in his new position at centre half. But where United's dipping form came after Christmas was the fact that the rest of the reserves occasionally coming in and they weren't up to it. I mean, Harry Gregg suffered this injury, as Paddy mentioned earlier, and he had a few injuries. It's a strange one as well, because sometimes when you look back at Harry Gregg's unfortunate injury record, you wonder how much of it. I know that there were different injuries. He had shoulder injuries and stuff like that. But he played on for a long time with a fractured skull that was never sort of addressed or mended. Do you know what I'm not saying that when his shoulder injuries were obviously a separate thing, but you wonder how much of that played into it because
well, yes, a shoulder and back. I mean, you remember the cup final where he's barged in the back over the line, and yes, Harry did suffer from a lot of injuries. He made very little of the skull fracture at Munich. A very, very brave human being, but he did confess. Oh, I was worried about my back. He got a shoulder charge didn't mind a shoulder charge, but he got a shoulder charge from Alfredo Di Stefano in the friendly against Real Madrid, and he said I was still shaking 20 minutes later. But no, he did have a lot of injuries, and his worth to United was kind of illustrated by the fact that his deputy was another Northern Irishman, but one of very tender years, called Ronnie BRIGGS, who came in, who was playing in the Sheffield Wednesday game, had previously had a bit of a nightmare. I can't remember who it was against, but was just too young at that time, and suffered the kind of lonely terror that only goalkeepers really endure at a very tender age.
Yeah. The other one was against Leicester City. They lost by a big score. Actually, I think it was 6-0. 6 at Leicester.
Yeah, you know what happened at Leicester? This was another thing. You know, I did say that it was a season, yes, of steering away from trouble and looking up rather than down. However, the Leicester one infuriated Busby. It was 6-0, and the story there was that when they arrived at Filbert Street, as the ground then was, some of the players were late getting off the bus, and it's because they wanted to finish a card game, and Busby didn't like that. He felt it was unprofessional. They lost 6-0, and when they got back on the bus was steaming away up to north. And Busby, to his incredulity, noticed that despite having lost 6-0, this bunch had resumed their card game. So he walked over to the table, picked up the cards, opened the window, and threw them out. And no further comment was required. So yes, it was a problem. Harry Gregg remained out for a while. But Busby knew that he'd really blundered by putting in BRIGGS at such a young age. He went to QPR, got an amateur player called Mike Pinner, who really was as fundamental as Setters or the Fultz finally settling down at centre half. As Pinner was really fundamental in steadying the ship, and yes, he definitely had a cameo role in that season. Really helped United to get through without further damage.
Yeah, because they were desperate for a senior set of hands in there. Gaskell, he was called in, but still a little bit green.
Still a little immature, yeah. Not ready, but and of course, poor Ronnie BRIGGS, who, by the way, was later to play for Northern Ireland. So he showed a bit of character. I think he recalled, no, it was written in one of the newspaper accounts of the time, that after the 7-2 Sheffield Wednesday, he came off the pitch, you know, really with his hand over his eyes so that people couldn't see that he was crying. And
I've got the quote. We'll come to it in good time, yeah.
You got it there?
We've got the quote. In fact, I'll read it now. Yeah, it was basically it was the Sheffield Wednesday game where they lost 7. A lot of blame put on BRIGGS because it's one of those where he just couldn't read it, and 2 of the shots went through his hands basically. And the quote was a nightmare in a dream match, and in 7 dreadful minutes he presented Wednesday with 3 goals. This is the line: The boy in white pants 6 inches too short for his lanky legs came off the field last and alone, clutching his cap, covering his tears with his left hand, and loping with schoolboy awkwardness towards the players' tunnel. In his last stride, he paused to look up shyly at the packed stand, expecting, perhaps, assault or abuse. He received neither. Manchester, bless its broken sporting heart, gave him a cheer.
Wonderful. I mean, those, I don't know, you don't know who wrote those lines, do you? Because, I mean, they were worthy of a couple of the greats who great journalists who died at Munich. George Follows could have written that. Donny Davis of the Manchester Guardian could have written that. A wonderful, wonderful piece of sports writing. But anonymous, was it, Wayne? You don't have the
I think it was
name of
Evening
it?
News. I couldn't find the
Oh, the
source.
Evening News. Well, in that case, it would have been David Meek.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent.
United did recover towards the back end of the season. They went on a good run towards the end. I think it's 7 unbeaten. In April, they welcomed champions Burnley to Old Trafford, and they won 6-0. There were 2 hat-tricks in there.
Amazing.
And now Dawson, you wouldn't believe this, but Alex Dawson almost becoming surplus to requirements because there's a bit of quality coming back into that front line, as evidenced by the hat-tricks on the day scored by Dennis Violet and Albert Quicksall, who's now getting among the goals himself. So, a really big statement result. United do finish the season strongly. 7th, they finish at one point, like you said, they were careering close to the relegation zone, but 5 wins and 2 draws from the last 7 games. There was also a little bit of defeat in the Youth Cup, and if we talk about how green some of these lads were, you'll get a reference here. In the 5th round exit at Stoke, the unfortunate Ronnie Briggs, Jimmy Nicholson, and Ian MOIR, all of whom had already played for United's first team. And a little bit of trivia: the youth team also included Dennis Walker, United's first black player, but it was the first time that United had even failed to reach the semi-final of the Youth Cup. So, a sign of the rebuilding that's going on at that level. Another post-season trip, United go to Italy and Malta to finish that season. But all in all, Paddy, I mean, considering where they were in the autumn, 7th, 2 good runs of results, basically, despite the cup results, it's the kind of rebuilding exercise that Busby would have felt a little bit more positive about at the end of the season.
I don't know if you have all the results there, but you've already mentioned the victory over champions Burnley. Did United not also get the better of the team who succeeded, who were in this season to succeed Burnley as champions, the great Spurs double team? Did United not?
In early January, they scored. They won 2-0. Pearson and Nobby Styles getting among the goals there. Yeah, so in January.
And I mean, so this is a victory. You know, the 6-0 battering at Leicester is achieved by the same team who beat one of the greatest teams, in my opinion, one of the greatest teams ever to emerge in British football. Will certainly be one of the top 10 champions of all time, was the Spurs double team of that 60-61 season. A wonderful, wonderful team, and yet United were capable of beating them. It's a season of, it has to be said, the characteristic ups and downs. Every Busby season included heroics against one of the top sides. I can't think of any that didn't. So this was certainly no exception. And as we say, you know, we've mentioned setters, but I'm sure we'll get onto that when you discuss the tactics and a typical lineup of the team, which my guess is that you're not going to let us down and you're going to do it as you always do.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go through the squad statistics first then, because there are a few actually, 8 or 9 coming into the side this season. before we talk about Ronnie Briggs, we'll talk about Harry Gregg was a senior, was a number one when he was available. 30 appearances, which tells you how badly his injury problems restricted him. Those 30 in all competitions, 27 in the league. Gaskell, as his stand-in, played 11 in all competitions, 10 of those in the league. It is the other stand-ins that are of interest for this episode. You've got Ronnie Briggs, Belfast born, nice 6'2" height, really. And his debut was in that defeat against Leicester. We've already talked about the press criticism that he received. As you already mentioned, Paddy, I mean, all's well that would end well for Ronnie, even only a year later. So he's still 18 when he played for Northern Ireland, although the unlucky lad that he was, he ended up conceding 4 times on his debut against Wales, which unfortunate for him. You mentioned Mike Pinner as well. Let's give a little bit of background for Mike Pinner. He was a journeyman amateur, really, with 52
Yes.
caps for the amateur English team. He'd also, amateur English national team, I should say. He'd also played for a number of amateur clubs as well. He'd been around the block a little bit. He'd made appearances for the British team in the 56 and 60 Olympics. Maybe Busby feeling that there's a little bit of inspiration from the Warren Bradley route to go for Mike Pinner. But he came in after Briggs' struggle. Now, he didn't keep a clean sheet in the 4 appearances that he played, but he did steady the ship. He had the experience of steadying the ship when you had this defensive reorganisation trying to find its feet again. Before making the decision to go professional, he was actually a lawyer, and he became a property developer alongside his professional career. He made, in keeping with Pinner's journeyman career, it even translated into his professional career because he made only these 4 appearances for the club, and he moved to Chelsea at the start of the following season. But much like we'll probably talk about Tony Coton in 30 years' time, who maybe we won't because he never made a single appearance for the club, but his actual presence at the club made a bit of a significant difference right at the time when United needed it. And a podcast like this is to shine a light on someone like Mike Pinner, who I bet 99% of people watching this or listening back to it would never have heard of before, but he did come in and helped at a crucial time. Another of those with a peripheral contribution was Harold Bratt. He made 1 single appearance in the League Cup as Busby, setting the tone for how the League Cup would be used by Manchester United. He was a member of the 1957 Youth Cup team at left half. His only appearance did come at Bradford. He joined Doncaster at the end of this season and later joined Greater Manchester Police and played for Altrincham. The other fullbacks, I should say, Joe Carolan, who was the prominent member of the team in the previous season. He only played 3 appearances in all competitions, 2 of those in the league. Brennan, now the dominant right back, at 41 appearances in the league and 46 in all competitions. Tommy Heron, just a single league appearance, and he'd obviously made some appearances before as well. The other fullbacks this season, you mentioned Tony Dunne earlier on, signed from Shelbourne. He made his debut at Burnley in a 4-3 defeat. John Kennelly giving him a bit of a rough time on his debut. He only played 4 appearances this season. Obviously, as you can tell, there's a few more to come. 3 of those appearances are in the league, so he's learning his trade, mostly because Noel Campbell's coming and he's the dominant left-hand side. We talked earlier on in earlier episodes about sportsmen of multiple disciplines. Campbell's a top-class cricketer and footballer from County Cork. You're quite right, Paddy. I mentioned 20,000 earlier on, but it's actually 29,500. Another of those. Busby really liked that figure of money, didn't he? Around 29 to 31,000.
He didn't like to go above 30 if possible.
International class fullback, like Setters, immediately came in with authority. A fullback to play on the left-hand side. Dunne perhaps not quite ready, but Cantwell with bags of experience, assuming the first team role, basically of Roger Byrne even, and soon being earmarked for the captaincy, even though, of course, that is in the possession of Setters at the moment. Cantwell in all competitions played 27 games this season and scored 2 goals. Both of those goals came in the FA Cup, 24 appearances in the league. Elsewhere at fullback, Ronnie Cope, who now moved to right back as Bill Fowkes was the dominant centre half. Cope made 7 appearances in all competitions, 6 in the league. Moving to the halfback line, Bill Folkes made 45 appearances in all competitions, 40 of those in the league. But he didn't actually start the season in the number 5 shirt. That was Frank Haydock. He was an Eccles-born centre-half who come through the ranks. He started the season in the number 5 shirt. Cope was the one who actually took it off him originally, and then Folkes came in to take over after that. In the halfback line, we already talked about Styles earlier, but we'll come on to him in a moment. Let's give a brief mention for Jimmy Nicholson, who made his debut this season. Belfast Boners, I think Paddy already said earlier on, he made 37 appearances. So already coming in just as a kid, 37 appearances in all competitions, 5 goals. All of those goals came in the league and in 31 league appearances. Now, he was a man, or a man of a boy, really, again, like Duncan Edwards. Due to his schoolboy prowess and his nationality, there was a little bit of paper talk or speculation that he might, or hope, really, that he'd be a blend of Edwards and Blanchflower. Even before he made his debut for United, he played in a B international for Northern Ireland. So he was really highly thought of. A mature passer, strong in the tackle, but like Edwards, often did receive comments about his weight. Unfortunately for Nicholson, I think those bobs would stay with him for a little while. Edwards obviously grew into a man. Nicholson had to contend with those for a little while. Nobby Styles, as we already mentioned earlier, the son of Charlie Styles, a Collyhurst undertaker who was involved actually in the funerals of some of the perished babes. And Nobby attended many of those. His heroes, we already mentioned, was Eddie Coleman. He cleaned his boots. And after he scored against Newcastle earlier in the season, he actually said, this was his quote, it showed a touch of collie. I broke quickly and sent the ball into the top corner. It was a nice goal for a kid to dedicate to his hero. As we already mentioned, Styles did score another goal that season. So 2 goals in 31 appearances, 2 in 26 in the league. So, those 2 goals actually quite memorable. Obviously, one for being his first goal, and the second because it was against the champions elect. He actually said prior to his own debut of his own ascent into the reserves that playing for United's reserves at the end of 1958 meant rather less than it might have done at the start of the year, which was interesting. Styles even played it inside forward in his early days due to his diminutive size. While he got used to the rigors of first team football, maybe he put those contact lenses in, and the size of the goal in front of him was big enough for 2 yards. The other halfbacks, Maurice Setters, now obviously a dominant feature in that halfback line. 4 goals in 45 appearances, 40 of those were in the league. Nobby Lawton, you mentioned him earlier in the episode, and we mentioned him earlier on, made 2 appearances, just 1 in the league. And the halfback, the forward line, Warren Bradley, just 4 league appearances as he comes to the end of his memorable and crucial contribution to United history. Alex Dawson, 20 goals in 34 appearances, 16 in 28 in the league. Johnny Giles, 3 goals in 25 appearances, 2 in 23 in the league. Kenny Morgan's one of those Munich survivors now, again struggling with the weight of expectation. 2 appearances, just 2 league appearances this season. Scanlon, before he sold to Newcastle, 1 goal in 11 appearances, 8 of those appearances in the league. Mark Pearson, 9 goals in 33 appearances, 7 in 27 in the league. Bobby Charlton, the top goal scorer with 21 goals, and in 42, 21 in 39 in the league. Quicksall, now really among the goals, 15 goals in 41 appearances, 13 in 38 in the league. He's really doing a decent job after that early struggle. And Dennis Violet, of course, even accounting for the injury that he suffered, 16 goals in 27, 15 in 24 in the league. And finally, that brings us to Ian MOIR, who we mentioned earlier on, an Aberdeen-born right winger. Look at that tuft of hair. And really a tall and quick guy. He had a really slender way, a little bit like Stan Pearson, really, but on the wide right. You might remember Jimmy Delaney coming in a little bit shorter, a little bit stockier. Ian Moyer's got a little bit of class around him, and really highly rated at the time because of his dribbling style. And he made his debut in the same game as Styles back in October. You're quite right, Paddy. We'll come on to the tactics now.
Yeah.
Put them now. It's very difficult, really, to put a definite formation out here because a lot of players play between 20 and 30 games again, but this is the closest you can get to a team that looks like it's there.
Yes.
I mean, because you've got MOIR who could play on the right hand side. He played his fair amount of games.
Yeah.
Scanlon obviously played some. Warren Bradley, all these kind of players. So yeah, you've got Greg in goal.
Yeah.
5 changes as well, more or less, to the most prominent first team of the previous season, which, again, Paddy, and when you look at the composition of the front line, the fact that Charlton's on the left-hand side, but even MOIR would play on the left sometimes, and Dawson's on the right, Pearson through the middle, it shows you that there's a great versatility there, but also that Busby hasn't quite settled on a perfect front line yet.
Yeah, there are the two things that stand out for me there. I mean, are the Matt moving Charlton to outside left, which, apart from anything else, it reflects the preponderance of sort of creative goal-scoring attacking midfield players, if you like, Quicksall, Violet, Pearson, and Mark Pearson, of course. Not to mention the attacking contribution of Nicholson. So Charlton moves to outside left. Dawson would have played through the middle at times, although Busby used him mainly, as you rightly denote there, on the right. Yet still he scored, and yet Busby clearly wondered if he had quite Manchester United class about him. And the other key is the defence settling down a bit. Now, the setters could slip in there alongside Fulks and help out. That was key. That enabled Fulks to settle at centre half, where Busby had always wanted him to settle, and where he was to prove himself a United great. Cantwell at left back and Brennan at right back. Now that's interesting because when Brennan didn't play at right, but bear in mind that Brennan was of the line that had included Carey, John Aston Senior, the great Roger Byrne, of fullbacks who'd begun as either inside or outside forwards and had moved back so that they could play from the back. Brennan was to again prove a historic figure at right back. And when he didn't play, his deputy was Tony Dunne, who you mentioned, who'd just been bought for 5,000 from Shelburne in Dublin. And my word, Brennan and Dunne, those two names were to, but anyway, that's for another episode. So it's a time of constant evolution, but in terms of the Manchester United defence, an evolution that was to prove historic in the years to come.
Yeah, interesting as well to note that you mentioned setters would drop into the back line, but at the time, very much this was seen as the formation of the day. We're sort of 14, 15 years into the series now, and there's still it's a gradually changing one shape that becomes more prominent and more official over time. But yeah, as you already mentioned there's a lot more emphasis on not pragmatism, but sort of like a sensible approach. Not that you would tell from United's goal tally this season, which is 88 goals scored and 76 shipped. So we're talking about the defensive settlement, but
Busby was one of the few managers that wasn't worried about that. This is why all over the world managers were sort of beginning to think in terms of a back four, but Busby resisted. He wasn't too bothered. Well, he was bothered because he didn't like losing 6-0 and winning 6-0, but he was less bothered about it than some, put it that way. But bear in mind, it was still at a time of where the best teams could be flamboyant. The great Tottenham that I mentioned, and Bill Nicholson, their manager, was very much of the belief of Busby that football was an entertainment. They scored 115 in the league alone. Now, the 80 that United scored would probably win the league most years now, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And then 76 would be enough to get them relegated.
Well, where did it? True. Where did they finish? Seventh again?
Seventh in the league, yeah. So a decent finish considering, where they started, the way that they started the season. Just looking at the trivial points that we always comment on, the colours this season. They actually made a minor change to the home kit. They wore white socks.
Yes.
They wore that in their home kit. So red, white, and white. The all white away strip remained as it was, and the United review with the strange body composition handshake still in place. The average attendance, Paddy mentioned this earlier. Yesterday it went down to 15,000 for the League Cup game, but it actually dropped 10,000 overall. So it's 38,501 this season. We already mentioned Bobby Charlton, top goal scorer. Maybe a little bit of, I'm not saying lessening belief, but maybe a bit of post-Munich fatigue from the supporters who have been through this big emotional ride, and it's a lot to sort of see this turnover of kids who aren't quite the Busby Babes, which is understandable. The key results obviously being the 6-0 win over Burnley, and you mentioned the 2-0 win over Spurs, and also the Christmas results where they battered Chelsea and Manchester City. Again, an indication that United were heading somewhat in the right direction and were at least capable of handling themselves with the best. Elsewhere in football, Paddy, you quite rightly mentioned Spurs winning the league and FA Cup, a fantastic team, and they'd actually beaten United earlier in the season 4-1. And you've already given due credit to a fantastic team there, Bill Nicholson. What can you say? Spurs in the last time they won the league. So we've got to, if there are any Spurs fans who stumbled their way onto this podcast, then you've got to give them the due credit, because we have done to the other sides, the Newcastles and Arsenals and Portsmouths before. So Spurs of this first of this series to win a league and cup double, you've got to sort of take your hat off to the marvellous achievement, haven't you?
Yes, absolutely. One other tiny detail, if I might squeeze it in, is that the League Cup, as you rightly say, this was the inaugural season, and in the end, it was won by the manager was an old friend of Busby's and a man who was to remain a Mancunian neighbour and rival, but that's for another episode or two, was Joe Mercer. Won it with, he'd gone into management with Aston Villa and had won a two-legged final against Rotherham United. That's the first League Cup final.
Mercer, of course, the man who told Busby to get Edwards when he was disappointed about missing out on Everton. So already a man with a long history attached to United. Yeah, elsewhere in English football, Ipswich, notable promotion to Division 1 with Alf Ramsey as manager. Peterborough in Division 4. Why are we mentioning Peterborough? Well, they set a record this season. Obviously, the Division 4 is a new division, but they scored 134 goals, which is an English league record. Another record was set in the summer of 61, Paddy, after Benfica won the European Cup. We talked about the Italians wanting to spend money. You mentioned Dennis Law, and he is lured by the lira, isn't he? He goes to Torino for £100,000.
Yeah. And that's after having had the double completed over him by Manchester United while with Man City. They'd won the race for him. As we know from previous episodes, Matt fancied him from the age of 18, Dennis Law, and kept trying to bring him. Wasn't successful. Bill Shankly had tried to take him to Liverpool as well. Bill Shankly had been his manager at Huddersfield. But no, the lure of the lira. By the way, just for younger, that was the old Italian currency before the euro.
Another interesting story on Dennis Law, where he obviously played against United's youth team back in the day, and I think he'd scored a couple of goals against United in the either the youth cup or the reserve team. David Gaskell was the goalkeeper. He made a very unfortunate decision, Gaskell, to applaud Dennis for scoring an amazing goal against him, while Jimmy Murphy was not very happy about that. He pinned him up in the dressing room and he said, well, how dare you applaud another player for, blah, 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 gave him the right act. And then the first thing he did once he was back on the bus was like make a plan to tell Busby all about Dennis Lowe, who scored. And I think that was the instigation for the first bid, which was failed.
I'm sorry. I know we've overrun as we so often do on these episodes, but I have to tell you, there was a Jimmy Murphy classic about. We've spoken quite a lot about Ian MOIR, the Scottish winger. Apparently, one time, it might have been for the reserves or something, but Ian MOIR was playing on the wing, and he kept overrunning the ball into touch. Before he could cross, and anyway, at halftime, Murphy does a switches him with the centre forward, and plays him centre forward in the second half. And the guy who'd been switched with, Sammy McMillan, says to Murphy at the end, why did you switch me to the wing? He says, well, I wanted Ian at centre forward so he could overrun the ball into the net.
Good that Murphy's still got his wits about him after enduring such tragedy. But he's one of many wisecracks that Murphy would make over the coming years as well. That making the stuff a legend. That about wraps it up for this episode. If you're watching the video, give it a like and subscribe. Join in the conversation in the comment section. If you're listening back on the audio podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a review on the platform you're listening on. And while you're on the channel, why not choose one of the many other episodes that we've got of United history, where we look at the various facets of the Sir Matt Busby reign and the other reigns to come as well. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back